She thought it would be just another quiet flight home, a window seat, a deep breath, and a few hours to herself. But within minutes of sitting down, everything changed. A fellow passenger complained, voices rose, and suddenly the attention of the entire cabin turned toward one black woman who had done nothing wrong. What happened next would leave her shaken, humiliated, and questioning how something so unfair could happen in public. With so many people watching, the airline staff tried to calm the situation, but instead of protecting her rights, they made a decision that would follow them for months. She was asked to give up her seat, not because of safety, not because of policy, but because it was easier to move her than to confront the problem. As she walked down the aisle, holding back tears, no one knew they were witnessing the start of something much bigger. That night, she didn't sleep. She replayed every moment, every word, every look, and by morning, she made a choice that would turn a painful experience into a fight for justice. What the airline didn't know was that this quiet passenger was about to take action that would expose discrimination, challenge corporate power, and send shockwaves through the industry. By the next day, the airline's biggest mistake was only just beginning. By sunrise, the shock had settled into something heavier. She sat at her kitchen table, coffee untouched, scrolling through her phone as messages from friends and family poured in. Some were angry, some were worried. All of them told her the same thing. What happened on that flight was wrong. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a bad travel experience. It was a pattern many people recognized, but rarely challenged. She remembered the moment the airline representative avoided her eyes, the way rules suddenly felt flexible when convenience mattered more than fairness. Later, she would learn this wasn't the first complaint against that airline, and not the first time a passenger felt quietly pushed aside. The difference now was timing, evidence, and her decision not to stay silent. Behind the scenes, emails were being drafted, calls were being made, and legal advice was carefully sought. She gathered boarding passes, seat numbers, and names, documenting every detail of that flight. Each small fact felt like a piece of a larger truth. Meanwhile, the airline released a brief statement, carefully worded, offering regret without responsibility. What no one saw was how calm she remained. No interviews, no social media posts, just quiet preparation. The airline assumed the story would fade like so many others. But as paperwork moved forward and deadlines closed in, it became clear this situation was far from over. Something was building, and once it surfaced, a fellow passenger reached out quietly, saying they had recorded part of the incident but were afraid to post it. A flight attendant, using a private email, hinted that the crew had felt pressured to keep things moving rather than follow proper airline policy. Each message added another layer to what had seemed like a single moment of injustice on a routine flight. Her lawyer warned her that airlines don't back down easily. Big companies have teams trained to delay, deny, and distract. Still, the evidence kept growing. Witness statements described the discomfort in the cabin, the silence that followed, and the way the real issue was never addressed. The focus had shifted away from the disruptive passenger and onto the woman who was asked to move, as if her presence itself was the problem. Inside the airline's offices, meetings were being held behind closed doors. Executives reviewed reports, legal teams debated language, and public relations experts prepared for possible fallout. They hoped the situation would stay contained. But rumors of a lawsuit were already circulating, and travel forums buzzed with similar stories from other passengers. She felt the weight of it all, but she didn't step back. This wasn't just about one seat or one flight anymore. It was about accountability, equal treatment, and whether a powerful airline could be forced to answer for what happened next. The pressure began to rise when the official complaint turned into a formal lawsuit. Suddenly timelines mattered. Depositions were scheduled. Internal airline records were requested. What once felt distant now sat on desks inside corporate offices, stamped and serious. The airline's tone shifted, moving from polite regret to firm denial. Their lawyers argued policy, safety, and procedure, carefully avoiding the human side of the story. At the same time, more voices came forward. A former employee shared that similar incidents had been quietly settled before. A travel blogger uncovered patterns buried in public records, connecting stories that looked isolated but felt painfully familiar. Each new detail tightened a knot. The airline tried to control the narrative, but the narrative was slipping. She felt it during every meeting, every late-night phone call. This case was bigger than she imagined, and the stakes were rising fast. If she pushed forward, there would be scrutiny, delays, and pressure to walk away. If she stopped, the silence would continue, just as it always had. Then came the moment no one expected. A key document surfaced, one the airline hadn't planned to release. Its contents hinted at decisions made long before her flight ever took off. Her legal team went quiet as they read through it, exchanging looks that said everything without a word. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered. Inside, the clock ticked closer to a hearing that could change everything. And still, the airline had no idea how close they were to facing the consequences of that single decision made in the air. Just when it seemed the case couldn't grow any larger, another surprise surfaced. The document wasn't just about her flight, it referenced internal training notes, outlining how staff were advised to handle passenger conflicts when complaints became uncomfortable. The wording was vague, but the message was clear enough to raise serious questions. Her lawyer explained that if this became public, it could open the door to far more than a single discrimination lawsuit. At the same time, the airline made a move of its own. They quietly reached out with a settlement offer, framed as a gesture of goodwill, not an admission of fault. The number was tempting, and the timing was strategic. Accept it now, they suggested, and avoid the stress, the headlines, the long court battle, but buried in the paperwork was a clause that demanded silence. Meanwhile, the video from the flight finally surfaced, still unposted, still unseen by the public, but powerful enough to change everything, if released. Her legal team debated strategy late into the night. One wrong step could weaken the case. One bold move could expose a system that had gone unchecked for years. As word of the lawsuit spread, the airline's stock began to dip just slightly at first. Executives felt the shift. It was a growing storm, and everyone involved knew. The next decision would determine who lost the most when it finally broke. The turning point came faster than anyone expected. During the hearing, the judge ordered the airline to submit the full, unedited records tied to passenger complaints and crew decisions. When those files were reviewed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The airline's own data showed repeated cases where passengers were moved, ignored, or pressured for the sake of convenience. What had been denied for months was now laid out in plain language. The settlement offer was withdrawn, replaced by a public acknowledgement and a sweeping agreement that included compensation, policy changes, and mandatory staff retraining. For the woman at the center of it all, it wasn't about the money. It was about being heard, believed, and respected. Her lawsuit forced accountability in a way apologies never could. But just as the story seemed complete, one final twist emerged. The quiet video from the flight was never released. Instead, it was placed under court protection, sealed after revealing something even more damaging than expected. Insiders knew what it showed, and that knowledge alone reshaped how the airline operated going forward. The public saw justice. The industry felt pressure, and she walked away knowing one moment of courage had changed far more than a single flight. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects became clear. The airline rolled out new passenger rights guidelines, updated conflict training, and a transparent review system that couldn't be quietly ignored. Other airlines took notice, adjusting their own policies before questions reached their doors. What started as one unfair moment on a flight had shifted how the industry talked about accountability and equal treatment. For her life slowly returned to normal, but with a deeper sense of purpose. She received messages from travelers who said her lawsuit gave them the courage to speak up after years of staying silent. Some shared similar stories, others simply said, "Thank you." She read every one, knowing the impact went far beyond a courtroom victory. The airline never used the same language again. Words like convenience were replaced with fairness, safety, and respect. Behind those changes was the understanding that silence is no longer an option when discrimination is challenged with truth and persistence. Looking back, she realized the power wasn't in confrontation, but in calm resolve. One seat, one decision, one lawsuit that forced a powerful company to listen. The lesson was simple and lasting. When passenger rights are